So here's what we're going to do. I've been asked to focus on two things. One is really to give a little bit of a context. So you're going to be dealing with how do we do Tier 2, how do we build district systems, how do we actually use data for decision making with respect especially to focus on equity and disproportionality. But let's put that in context and let's actually talk about what's happening nationally and how these things fit together. The second and the really important thing I want is I want people who are new to coming here to really get a good sense of the fact that there are core features of PBIS. This is not just about a logo and a banner. It really is about changing the social culture of the school. But the second part, come on, everybody in this room that controls a budget of over $1 million, I want you to be thinking about what you will do in the next 3 months to increase the capacity of your school, your district, your county, your region, to actually sustain what's going on. It's always nifty to get into something new that gets started, but you're not going to implement PBIS throughout all of LA. You're not going to implement PBIS across the Northern California region. You're not going to be able to keep PBIS going at the Desert Mountain SELPA unless you invest in building capacity so that you're able to do it much more locally. We love the stuff about using money to fly people in to deliver workshops and sessions. Here's what I want to see. 3 months from now, I want you to be able to do more of that locally. So one of the things I want you to end up with by 10:15, I want you to be able to say, what are the systems variables that we're really looking at? The other piece that I think is a theme, look through the sessions. And in many different ways, you see a theme that shows up with different language. Sometimes the language is equity, sometimes the language is disproportionality, sometimes the language is inclusion. But if you are really committed, if you're committed to implementing multi-tiered systems of academic and behavior support, part of what you're really saying is we want to make schools work for a wider range of children. We want to stop doing that part of always looking for where Emily or Emmanuel need to go to be able to get services. And we want to talk about how we make this school the place for them. So in part, I want you to come back to this tough part about saying it's easy to say that's a goal. It's much harder to actually deliver the interconnected supports, both academic, behavioral, mental health, that are actually necessary to pull that off. So for those of you who are new, how many people are, say, within the first year of implementing PBIS? First year. All right, only about 17.4%. How many, 2 to 5 years? 2 to 5 years. Excellent, excellent, 2 to 5. How many more than 5 years? All right, you all get platinum stars, right? Okay, here's what I want you to do. Everybody who's here within the next 6 months, you should be prepared to do a presentation on PBIS. And the interesting thing is, regardless of how that presentation starts, I want you to come back to why are we doing this? Why is it really there? So the primary fundamental purpose of PBIS is to make schools more efficient, more effective, and more equitable learning environments for all kids. So when you're talking to the school board, when you're talking to the PTO, when you're talking to other professionals and colleagues, use this slide. And remember, all slides that you see here today, you're going to be able to download off the Coalition's website. Download and use this slide. The primary purpose of PBIS is not to have banners, and it's not to have all of the peripheral pieces. It's really to make schools more effective learning environments. And one of the things that George has taught us, George Sugai, who actually grew up in Los Gatos and is a Californian, even though he now resides in Connecticut. But part of what he taught us is, if you look at all the fancy research, you can really condense it to 4 big messages. Create schools that as an entire learning community are excruciatingly predictable. They're consistent across people, place, and time. They're positive places where people, both kids and students, want to be. And they're places that are perceived as safe. When we do PBIS well, this is what we create. The result is kids who show up, who behave in ways that are socially coherent, and who actually benefit academically. And what you're doing, I love the fact that you've got numbers. Not only is it neat that you've got numbers talking about implementation of PBIS, it's simply fantastic that you've got numbers at all. All right? I mean, come on, how many other places do you go to where they're not really quite sure? There are right now over 23,000 schools in the United States that are implementing PBIS. 23,000. That's over 20% of all the schools in the United States. And it really reflects the fact that the learning environment has been improved for over 11,700,000 children. That's worth doing. I want you to come back to that, not just the schools in California, but the number of kids that that represents. And listen, one of the things I've learned when I present this, I always need to also add, yes, we are doing this in high schools, all right? Yes, we are. This is also happening in high schools. So even high schools can do this, juvenile justice environments can do this, and as we're reaching out and linking, interconnecting, if you would, with mental health, part of what you're seeing is a much greater assimilation. The other thing I want you to be excited about, I mean, come on, this is something where, as the keynote, one of the things I want is I want you to really feel positive about the place that we're headed. This is a graph of the number of schools implementing PBIS by state. By state. There is California. California is the state in the United States with the most schools implementing PBIS. And that has been largely due to work that's happened in the last 5 years. There was a lot of development, a lot of basic pieces, but those of you who are working in districts and counties, you have made a real shift. I mean, you have a lot to be proud of. Now that you're being proud, that was nice, and we're done with that. So now, this is a graph of the proportion of schools, all right? So we still have we've got about 23% of the schools in California that are implementing PBIS. So the opportunity for growth, for development, for impact is still really dramatic. So part of what I want you to be excited about is this is happening. It's happening all throughout the state, and you're actually being really quite successful. And I got to tell you, I mean, my heart goes out. The schools that were just acknowledged, the bronze, silver, gold, platinum schools, and quite frankly, there are a number of other schools that didn't quite get their applications organized. You got more schools out there because what I know, I actually have the database where you're submitting those TFIs. All right? This is the number of schools in California implementing PBIS. There were over 1,700 schools that submitted fidelity data last year. And there are over 600 schools that actually implemented with Tier 1 fidelity. So part of what I want you to really take away is schools in California not only are saying they're doing PBIS, they're actually doing it. And next year, when we come to this conference, you ready? The next graph is going to say how many schools are doing Tiers 2 and Tier 3. Because if you're really committed to equity, you're committed to equity for those kids who come from different cultures, those kids who come from different languages, and those kids who come with a little bit of an edge that makes it more challenging. The thing that's great about this multi-tiered systems logic is we start by saying we don't just have one way to do it, we have multiple tiers of intensity where we can pull that off. And let me tell you, you are. So these are your data. These are data from last year, only schools in California. The second from the left bar is 445 elementary schools. The third from the left is middle schools, 131, and the third from the right are high schools. This is office discipline referrals per 100 students per day, right? And those of you who can do the LLCCPD, LCCPD, you can do office referrals per 100 per day too, all right? Now you look up there and you look at the bars and you think, boy, I really like the green, nice shade of green. Here's what I want you to do. This is the median for elementary schools in the United States. This is what is typical in other parts of the country. 445 elementary schools in California are delivering educational supports in which they are reducing the number of problem behaviors at a level that's less than typical. The same is true of middle schools. And come on, believe it. People think middle schools, nothing can happen, right? In truth, middle schools, this is happening, even in middle school. Now in high schools we still have more than is average, but not that much more. And most of the stuff in high schools, quite frankly, keeps coming back to tardy, skipping, truancy, not being there type things. And so part of what I want you to take away, I want you to take away the sense of things are working in terms of problem behavior. Now, in terms of challenges, here's one of the things I want you to write in the back. You got all those pages in the back that are open. I want you to take this away. This is the ethnicity data with respect to office discipline referrals. Again, only California schools, only last year. These are the elementary schools in California for last year. Now, when you look up there, what you're looking across at the bottom are children who are African American, children who are from Asian background, children who are from Hispanic Latino background, children who are from mixed environments, children who are self-identifying as white. And the green bar, you ready with this? The green bar is the proportion of children enrolled. Got it? The proportion of children enrolled in 371 elementary schools in California last year. The blue bar are all the office discipline referrals, but now it's done by the proportion of office discipline referrals by ethnicity. So here's the thing to look at. I mean, look at those two big bars in the middle. See the two big bars in the middle, the Latino, Hispanic? The green bar is bigger than the blue bar, right? So there are fewer office discipline referrals than you would expect given enrollment. But then I want you to look down here. Okay. All right, gear up here. We are not meeting the needs of kids who are coming to California schools, elementary schools, who are African American. Part of what we're doing is we're doing a higher rate of higher rate of office discipline referrals than would be expected. And look at the fact that the blue bar is not just bigger than the green bar, it's about twice as big. So you've got a risk index of about 2.2.4, all right? So one of the things I want you to do when you go back to your school, I want you to look at, are we implementing PBIS? What is our TFI data? And then to what extent, what is our office discipline referral data? Not just in terms of absolute patterns, but in terms of relative patterns by ethnicity. So these are the same data for middle schools. This is 115 middle schools in California. You still have essentially the same basic pattern, but look at how the blue bar is a little bit higher for the Hispanic Latino too. So in part, we see some of those issues develop. The interesting thing, you ready? I love this. When you do the 51 high schools that actually reported data, the level of disproportionality actually decreased. Now that looks good. That looks great. The problem is what we get is not disproportionality in terms of office referrals, we get disproportionality in terms of dropping out. And dropping out is, I want you to come back to that. So in part, okay, here you go. Now, part of my, I did the part in the beginning of saying we're good, right? We did the clap, we're having a good time. My part is also to say, come on, what are we going to do to put this together? If you do PBIS well, you build a social culture that is inclusive. You build a culture that actually works for kids. One of the examples that I want to really raise, and there's a session that will be done later this afternoon, is work that's being done at San Francisco Unified. And one of the things that I'm very excited, I just spent 2 days working with the San Francisco Unified staff and faculty. And one of the things that they're doing is they're linking PBIS with the work that they're doing on restorative practices. How many of y'all doing restorative practices? Excellent. That's good. One of the messages I want you to take back, don't do things in parallel, do things in integration. Link things together, align for efficiency and effectiveness. And there are districts right now that are really owning this. The other thing that I'm really excited about is within San Francisco, they're making the shift from not just having data to using data. So one of the things that you're going to be seeing today, there are 3 sessions that are actually set up that say, okay, cowboy, now that you've actually got graphs, what are you going to do, right? And I love that. I love that because they say it much more nicely, right? And Cami would, of course, have a rhythmic way of doing it. But you get the idea that part of what we're looking for is really putting things together. So here's what I'm telling, all right? One of the things you can say, right now there are over 2,000 schools in California that are implementing PBIS, and that is a remarkable accomplishment. It is an accomplishment that is directly a result of what you all in this room are doing. Second, it's not just a matter of talking about PBIS. It's not just having posters. You actually have implemented, at least at Tier 1 and some of you at Tier 2, PBIS supports. You are actually creating environments that are more effective learning environments. You're seeing reductions in problem behaviors and office discipline referrals, partly through the behavioral systems you're doing, partly through your administrative policies. You're changing the extent to which we're looking at suspensions and expulsions in the state. So you are doing something that is both remarkable and measurable. But in addition, part of what I want you to be focused on is there's always going to be that part of how we're going to take it the next step. Focus on equity, focus on getting depth, and focus in part on establishing the systems that will get sustained implementation. If you do PBIS well, it should be easier to do the second year than it is the first, easier to do the third than it is the second. So one of the things I want to do is I really want to stress and emphasize how we make that happen. But I got to tell you, I worry, and I'm very guilty of this. I like looking at all these big numbers, and you've been looking up there. You look at the graphs, and you got this, and you got graphs here, and you got graphs there. At some point, we actually need to make this very personal. And the best way that I could think of doing this is I actually want to tell you a story. And I love telling PBIS stories. And most of my PBIS stories start in the beginning. There was darkness, problem behavior, aggression, and hell. And then we did impose clarity, consistency, predictability, and hope. And there was change. Okay, so you got that? This is a different story. This is a different story. And I want you to think about your story. This is my man Luis. And this is not his real name. This is not his real picture. But he is a real kid. And he is a real kid in Oregon. And my man Luis, he's a 4th grader this past year. And he came into a school that was using PBIS, but he came from a 3rd grade experience that had not been very positive. He was a child who came with a reputation. You all know that child who comes with a reputation. He was an English language learner. He was not great at reading, either in Spanish or in English. He had a history of aggression towards others, and interestingly, he actually had a history of of being sucked into that deviant peer group that you know, remember you want to say, you know, don't play with her type of stuff, right? He would go right to her. So he had that history. He came from a situation where he had a mom, a single parent with another sibling, and I mean, she loved her son, but she was really struggling with about 9 other parts of life that we got to get together. So she was dealing with all of these things. What I want you to think about, I'm trying to create a picture of a kid who's entering 4th grade last year with risk factors, right? Those of you who like the mental health logic. And so I want you to think about Luis. Here he is. He's starting last year. He comes into a school doing PBIS. Now, he actually shifted schools even though he was in the same district, which is why I actually knew who he was, and I was actually able to link up both with his school staff and his mom. And here's what happened. Here's the story. You ready? So I want you to look over there on the right side. So it says social and academic success. I mean, that's really what we're looking for. And here's the arrow that is taking us there. But in the middle is all of those red things that make life difficult and challenging, all those elevations of anxiety and intenseness. So one of the big deals was his aggression. I mean, he had this history of engaging in aggression under specific situations. But he came into this school. He came into this school that had been doing PBIS for 17 years. The school had a very clearly defined social culture. The school had a rhythm that worked. All of the other 5th graders, the other 4th graders, even the 3rd graders, they knew the behavioral expectations. They had done it before. They had a song. They even had, you like this, Cammie, they had a dance. All right, next year maybe we can get Cammie to do the dance. Luis, my man, came in and he got sucked into a culture where we don't do that, man. We do this. And we didn't see the aggression. I mean, and I was really disappointed because I had this neat plan all set up of here we're going to handle the aggression, right? I mean, come on. I mean, and they showed my PhD and everything, and so it was we're going to do this. And so we were going along here, but you know, the other thing that's always tricky is you got kids who have difficulty academically, and you know how academic difficulty creates tension, anxiety, and that leads to problem behavior. But we knew that he's a pretty smart kid. He just didn't read very well, so we did explicit instruction, added a half hour of extra work, and we did a program called instructional priming, where about 15 to 20 minutes before he went into reading group, somebody would review with him in Spanish what was going to happen in the English reading group. So he was basically ready with the what are we going to learn piece, and then he really did pretty well. I mean, again, we had the struggling reader program ready that we didn't really use. He had this strong history of sort of buying into the network of kids with whom it didn't work. But in this particular school, the kids were real organized around networks of kids who were supportive. And I love this. In part, he was a 4th grader. There's nothing like a cute 5th grader who's able to say, cowboy, we don't do that here, in 4th grade speak, right? And in part, the peer contagion stuff just didn't happen. The other thing that was great is, you know, there were times when, you know, his mom had trouble getting him to school, and there were other stuff going on within the family, but his mom actually got hooked up through the school psych with a community mental health provider. And she actually, you know, she told me I really didn't need any community mental health, but it really helped to get some of the transportation stuff and some of the other pieces linked up. And we ended up, I got to confess, there's no story. I want you to think about that. I want you to think about the number of students who are coming into schools that you've helped to transform. Kids who are coming in with risk factors that would be devastating, who because you create an environment that is predictable, consistent, positive, welcoming, and safe, you don't even see the things that we're all trained to fix. All right, here's the thing I want you to do. You ready? I want everybody here, before the end of the conference, I want you to come up with a story of your own. And you can come up with here's a kid who did better, but I want you to come on, you know these parents, you know the kids. I want you to transform PBIS from all of the pictures and all of the models and all of the triangles that we present, right? And one of the things I encourage you to do, keep track of the number of triangles you see today, right, as you go along. But I want you to write down a story. It doesn't have to be complicated. And I want you to send it to Mike Lombardo. There's his email address. All right? Now, I did not give his private phone. All right? But I want you to send Mike Lombardo a story of the little girl in 3rd grade, the 9th grade young man. I want you to tell the stories that you know that are special to you, that are not randomized controlled trials, but are really the thing that makes this work. All right? All right. So then, once you've done that, I want you to shift and I want you to build systems that are sustainable and are going to actually maintain things for a minimum of a decade. All right? So I want you to build things from now on that don't just work individually, but they also work, they're durable. They're things that keep things going. And Kent McIntosh tells us sustainability is the durable implementation of practices at a level of fidelity that you produce the effects. So what we're looking for, I want you to build multiple tiers. I want the tiers integrated. I want them laced with both the academic and the mental health as well as the behavioral pieces. And I want you to keep track. I want you to keep track of problem behavior. I want you to keep track of emotional competence. And I want you to keep track of not just do they avoid doing bad things. I want you to keep track of whether they do things well. Now, those of you who are in the early, remember that 17.24%? I want you to be really focused on the core features. So do we have the elements of a school that really make it work? For those of you who've been doing this, come on, the 68.4% that were 2 to 5, I want you to be talking about how are we not just putting the practices in place, but the organizational systems. Think about how teams operate differently in schools that are using PBIS. I want you to think about how we actually invest, not just in professional development, but in the coaching that gets professional development to produce change. Those of you who are building professional development plans, come on. Come on, this is September, right? You got to map out your days of professional development. Don't just have a Christmas tree of different things that your cousin knows how to do. Come up with a consistent, coherent map of professional development, and never do professional development training unless you also incorporate the coaching that'll make it relevant and alive in classrooms, hallways, cafeterias. So part of what I want you to think about is how do we actually put that stuff in place? And remember, one of the core things we always start by focusing on outcomes. And a big theme is those outcomes are defined not just nationally, but culturally. They're defined locally. The outcomes are the result of what practices you do. How do you actually set up classrooms? How do you establish behavioral expectations? Not just as things that are told, but are things that are taught. But the neat thing is that you do that with the systems that will allow those practices to have life. So the rule I want you to take back, never put practices in place that will last for less than a decade. Never put practices in place that won't last for at least 10 years. The only way you can do that is by having the teaming structures, the policies, the ways to make that work. So when you look and you say, my goodness, how can we make that happen? Here's what I want you to think about. So those of you who are new to PBIS, you want to be saying, if I walk into a school, can I identify 3 to 5 positively stated behavioral expectations? You need to be able to say that the fast way. We need an acronym for that, you know. Then I want a system where the kids are actually acknowledged. They actually know what's happening. So one of the things to do, a great thing, all right, we only have this conference today. So tomorrow, Friday, I want you to stop 10 kids, right? You've heard me say this before. Stop 10 different kids and say, look, cowboy, Do you know the behavioral expectations? And use whatever the developmentally appropriate way of asking that. You know, do you know the 3 B's? Do you know the cosmic values? Do you know whatever? But do you know what it is? Second, do you not only know the words, but do you know what it means right here, wherever we're standing? What does it mean for how you behave? And then the third question is, has anybody acknowledged you for doing things right in the past 2 weeks? Ask those 3 questions. If you're really implementing PBIS, 80% of the kids can tell you the answer to that. 80% of the kids. Listen, we did this. The story I love to tell is we did this in Fern Ridge Middle School, 538 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. 82% of the kids could tell us the behavioral expectations. Come on, this is middle school. 82% of the kids didn't know what day it was. That's what I want you to accomplish. Build consequences that are relevant and effective, not punitive, but instructional. Extend PBIS to the classroom. And listen, I've looked at your data. All those you turning in those TFIs, we actually look at the data. The place where things are struggling, a lot of it is struggling when you actually get to the classroom systems. So I want you to double down in terms of how we extend to the classroom. You are doing a great job of collecting data. We need to do a better job of using data. Build in the bully prevention and the family engagement. These are the core features of Tier 1 PBIS. Now, at least 50% of you could have made this slide. What I really want you to do now is I want you to do the systems. So here's a challenge for you, right? You're going to be focused on your teams doing well, but I also want you to do this. And this is something most of us don't actually control, so you don't think of it. But I want you to go back to your district or your school, and I want to say, we hire a lot of people, and the turnover in California schools is fairly significant, especially in the urban centers. I want you to ask this question. Does every job description, does every interview, does every discussion about new teachers, new school psychologists, counselors, social workers, nurses, all right, does it include this question? Preference is going to be given, all right? We're going to give preference to people who demonstrate experience and expertise in implementing multi-tiered systems of academic and behavioral support. Don't use PBIS. Don't use a label for something. This is about implementing multiple tiers of support. So you're going to hear more and more in California about MTSS, multiple tiers of support. And there's going to be funding for implementing multiple tiers of support. PBIS is multiple tiers of support for behavior, all right? That's what it is set up to do. So in part, think about the systems. Think about the extent to which, this is September, come on, last month when new people entered your school or your district, to what extent did they get oriented so that they were aware that we actually implement systematic school-wide strategies of behavior support? I mean, one of my dreams is that the principal of North Face Elementary hires a new 3rd grade teacher, and she walks in and walks up to him and says, "Hello, I am your new 3rd grade teacher. What are the behavioral expectations here?" Right? Wouldn't that be great? And I want you to work. Come on. I've talked over and over. Think about how much you struggle with the amount of training that you need to give to new teachers and new staff. We shouldn't be having to do that. We should be doing training that is local to the culture of the school. Your universities and your districts, your counties, should be providing the training that allows us to say, here's the foundation. Then I want to walk in and say, how do we do that in Loma Linda? How do we do that in Monterey? I mean, come on. In Monterey, we've got gang issues that make it different than some of the other districts. So that's what we want to be able to focus on. We don't want to spend our resources doing the foundation pieces. And I get the story that I keep telling. When I was first a teacher, my principal hired me, took me down to the room 19, opened the door, said, "These are your students, this is your room. God bless you, good luck." I want you to do better orientation than that, all right? I want you to do a better orientation than that. Professional development. I think actually, quite frankly, you all are good at that. I got to tell you, I am so impressed when I see how you all use materials that we have developed. You actually do it better than we do in many cases. I mean, I've always loved watching people take that stuff. Here's what I would tell you. Build things that work and give it away to everybody else. In this coalition, build things that work and send it to the coalition. Share. This is not about putting stuff together that you sell. It's about putting things together that we give to each other. It's what made the IT field blossom. It's what's going to make effective educational technology blossom. Never do training without coaching. Those of you who are building these training programs, if you are doing training without coaching, I want you to think seriously about doing this. Cut your training budget by 25% and use the extra 25% to get your school psychologists, counselors, and social workers providing the coaching that'll make it real in settings. Always use your data for evaluation, and part of what is making PBIS work, and this is critical, those of you who are really focused on the equity and the disproportionality issues, you build those successes by sharing the co-creation of how the culture operates in individual schools. Know what the core features are: predictable, consistent, positive, safe, expectations, acknowledgments, consequences. But let the path for how you get there be driven by the local setting. So in part, what we're looking for is we're looking for ways that we can pull that off. An example that I really want you to focus on is the turnover in administrators. Think about whether you call them principals or deans or cosmic gurus or whatever your local name for the person who's the leader of the school is. You've got, in many districts in California, you've got in some cases 20, 30, 40% of the leaders in the schools turning over. When you get leadership turnover, that's one of the major risk factors for sustaining PBIS. Part of what we've done, there's an article that we wrote for Teaching Exceptional Children on effective practices for principal turnover. It all really comes back to, have you actually built the organizational systems? Have you invested in the capacity? So are you actually looking at ways that you make things work? Now, the thing that Mike and others just really emphasized, one of your major strengths right now is you actually are holding yourselves accountable to whether you're measuring PBIS. You actually are building graphs that say, are we doing Tier 1? Are we doing Tier 2? Are we doing Tier 3? And one of the things Mike talked about, you get to go from bronze to silver if you actually have schools that are getting to 70%. The 70% comes not just as something that George made up. It really comes from the work that we've done that says if you can get to 70% on the TFI, you are implementing enough PBIS that you'll get change in child outcomes. This is all about child outcomes. So if you go from 20 to 40% or 40 to 60%, that's good, right? Everybody should get chocolate and good coffee. I mean, this is California, right? Or whatever else. But anyway, the thing that I want you to get to is when you get to 70% is when you've done enough that we actually expect to see change in kid outcomes. And that really is part of what we're seeing. When you get to 70%, that's part of what Kent McIntosh has taught us, actually changes the likelihood that things will sustain. So we're looking at Kent's data. And he keeps asking, if you could tell me just two things, what were the things that make the biggest difference in the likelihood that schools will keep using PBIS? And he's looked at 870 schools over the last 5 years. Ready? So here are the two big things. One, teams in the schools collect and use data. So you've reached criterion, you're at 70%, you're implementing in the classroom. If you continue to collect and use data, the likelihood that you will keep using PBIS goes up. The other thing is that the district has invested in capacity, training capacity, coaching capacity, data capacity. So in part, I want you to be thinking, we need to build social competence, we need to focus on equity, but part of what I want you to do as you're going from session to session today is look not just at what it means for the classroom in the school, look at what it means for building capacity at the district level to make things happen. Now, final big thing that I want to say, if we're going to do this well, you don't just do it once and then things stop. You do it, you watch, you adapt. Because the community changes, the faculty changes, things shift. So part of doing adaptation means continually paying attention to how's this going and how do we adjust. So let me share a story. This is a story from a research study done by Manuel Monsalve. Manuel has been a doctoral student at the University of Oregon for the past 4 years. He is now a professor in his home country of Chile. But what he brought, he thought we were just hilarious. I mean, the great thing is Manuel came, he watched what we were doing, he said, I cannot believe you're able to get people to do this. All right? And part of what he really brought for us was the cultural expectations and how do you respectfully implement things. So now, there are about 20% of you who are hardcore instruction, behavior, implementation folks. So this part is for you. Here's what he did. Manuel started with a problem, and this is a problem that, as I understand, you do not have in California, but that we do have in Oregon. We will sometimes start with a plan of support for a student on Tier 2 or Tier 3, and a team will get together and they will build a behavior plan. You all build behavior plans. But I got to tell you, in Oregon, we have way too often where the behavior plan has developed into this morass of bizarre stuff that really doesn't produce the changes that we're looking for. Now, Mike Lombardo promises me that in California, you build the plan, you implement it, and it all works. But we haven't been able to do that quite as well as you have. So here's what Manuel did. Is he said, look, okay, right? We can do this plan. We can do a plan, and part of what we know from behavioral science is that the plan has to be technically sound. So you build a plan of support only after you've been respectful. And respectful means that you've looked at the academic, the mental health, the behavioral assessment for a student. You can actually say what he does or what she does, what the situations are where it's most and least likely, and why it keeps happening. What are the outcomes that are maintaining the behavior? And you build a plan that's consistent with those assessments. But what Manuel said, he said, part of what it also does is it's not just do you have a nifty plan, it's like do you actually have a plan that normal humans can do? Now, I want you to worry. Those of you with your school psych licenses and whatnot, we got a little bit of a problem. In Oregon, we can come up with plans. I mean, we got 19 pages, single-spaced with glossy pictures and graphs. We got plans, that you could publish. But it turns out real humans don't do that. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to build plans that are short. You can still meet all of the state and federal requirements. I mean, we wrote some of the federal requirements, okay? And so part of what I want you to be thinking, make plans that are technically sound and contextually fit. And what that means, I want you to think about the people who will actually do the plans, the people who are the parents, the teachers, the paraprofessionals, the lunch aides. And I want you to ask this, is what you're asking them to do consistent with their values? Do they actually think this is not only worth doing, but something they're willing to do? Second, is it something that they know how to do? Third, are we giving them the resources, the time, the format, the materials to pull it off? And here, this is a biggie. Big star, are we doing the administrative support? Does somebody check and say, how's this going? How can we adjust? So when you build not just brilliant plans, but plans that have values, skills, research, look what I'm doing. I'm taking all the stuff about equity, cultural responsivity, and I'm saying, make it specific. How do you actually do that? You do it by touching the people at the place where they behave. And so here's what Manuel did. He, of course, given that he's a doctoral student, he created a model that nobody but his committee will ever keep track of. But the beauty is, I can make the slide where it all works, right? And here are 4 teachers that he worked with. 4 teachers, 4 students. Each student had a behavior plan. Each behavior plan was technically very nice. Not perfect, but should work. And what he did is he had observers go in to each of the classrooms where these kids were going. And I want you to look over there on the left side of these graphs. This is the proportion of elements of the plan that the teacher was actually implementing. So look up there, teacher 1. The proportion of the plan that was implemented was 0. It turns out the plans are much less likely to work if you don't use them. No, seriously. I mean, we can do the research and show that. All right, look at teacher 2. Look at teacher 3. Look at teacher 4. Now, these are nice people, very well trained, excellent grooming skills, all right? And they had all been in the meetings. So here's what Manuel did. You ready? Manuel said, at this point in time, we're going to have a meeting, and we're going to shift not what you're doing, but we're going to increase the contextual fit. So are you really clear about what's going on, and are you comfortable doing it? One teacher, for example, the plan said we'd use pre-correction. And she said, great, we'll use pre-correction. Everybody had agreed. It was in the plan. It was signed off. The director of special ed thought it was brilliant. Turns out the teacher didn't actually know what pre-correction was. But she did know that it was a word, and she did know it was something that was good, and yes, we'll agree to that. And if we ever see one, we will get it. Okay? So what Manuel did is he showed her what pre-correction would do, and he showed her how it would fit in her rhythm. All right? So basically what he did is he increased the contextual fit. And look what happened to the extent to which the teachers implemented the plan. Got it? The plan didn't change. The cultural fit changed. Well, not surprisingly, when you shift from teacher behavior to student behavior, this is the percent of 10-second intervals in which the student is behaving inappropriately. Look at before and look after. Student 1, student 2, student 3, student 4. This is a story, one that you've heard many times before. Oftentimes we come up with very well-developed plans. They don't work very well because they're not implemented, and everybody says, well, the plan was lousy. And we furrow our brow and say the plan was fine. Here's what I want to say. The plan was not fine. It was technically sound, but it did not meet the cultural adaptive features. Those of you who are technicians, those of you who are really invested in making PBIS work, the story from this is you got to pay attention to the context as well as to the technology. So here are my messages. 1, I want you to really have a good time today. I want you to be proud of what you've accomplished. PBIS is being implemented with depth, with precision, and with effectiveness in California. 2nd, as you listen, I want you to be saying, I think we can do this, and I want you to ask this question. What do we need from the district? What do we need from the county to be able to do it not just once, but for 10 years? Build the systems that allow PBIS to endure. And the other part is if we are really committed to the messages of equity, improving the disproportionality patterns that we see, part of what we're going to have to do is become much better at understanding how to maintain the core features but have the elegant adaptation to the local setting. You have a lot to be proud of. Have a good day. Thank you very much.